Hey everybody, it is Sunday afternoon and it's time to take a trip around the world. I've been in here all morning doing water changes and tank maintenance, and now it's time to have a walk around and look at all the stuff I've done and what's changed over the last week or so. This is my 29 miscellaneous. It's where we always start. It's one of my oldest tanks. That's why it's called my miscellaneous tank. It's been a lot of things over the years and had a lot of different fish in it, so I always just call it my 29 miscellaneous. So today when we did the water change, I actually got in and wiped down the glass, which is not something I normally do with this tank. It usually just doesn't grow enough crud on the glass, and then with the algae eating fish in there, I've got clown pleco on the bottom, and I've always got some sort of rubber lip or something in this tank, and they do a really good job of keeping the glass clean, but every now and again it gets a little bit grungy, and so today was one of those days. I also did a filter change while I was in there. I removed some of the Java fern that was a little rough looking, some of the fronds that were dead and brown. Probably should have got in and used my thumb and rubbed all the crud off of that Anubias. I didn't really even notice that, to tell you the truth. I just kind of did a water change real quick and wiped the glass down while I was in there. Now we got some new growth on the Anubias, and it does look really good overall. So two things I want to point out while I was thinking about while I was in here doing the water change. One is my black skirt tetras. Now I know these are the long finned models, and so they're a little extra flashy and sexy looking. But regular skirt tetras, black skirt tetras in particular, are one of my favorite fish. I've never had an aquarium without them since I started keeping fish. They were one of the earliest fish I ever bought. And in fact, that blue skirt tetra right there, which is a genetically modified skirt tetra, it's a glowfish, is one of the oldest fish I have. That tetra right there is probably at least 5+ years old now. I want to say maybe 2013 is when I got it. I'm guessing about that. Anyway, the black skirt tetras in there are a really, really good looking fish. And they're just underrated, I think. I think that they're just kind of considered one of those common fish that everybody's got, or they're, every big chain pet store sells them. But even as skittish as they are right now, right after this water change, you can watch their behavior. And they're one of the best schooling fish I've ever had. I've got the neon tetras, and I've had all sorts of different schooling fish that occasionally will come together and, do that sort of fluid motion where they flow back and forth in one single sort of unit. But no fish I've ever had does that more than the skirt tetras do. And to me, they are just sort of the quintessential tropical fish. I just really, really like my skirt tetras there, and I think they're one of the more underrated fish. The other thing I noticed while I was in here doing the water change was my little Bolivian ram down here. While everybody else in the tank was all freaking out and hiding, and I'm in there wiping down the glass, albeit gently, but it's still a big hand in the tank, and the water is swirling around, and there's a siphon hose going on. It's actively during a water change. Everybody's a little freaked out. But not my little Bolivian ram. He's coming out and checking out my hand and seeing what I'm doing and going around and pecking at the gravel right near where I'm wiping and, looking at any kind of bits of food that might be floating around. I absolutely love the little Bolivian rams. Of course, as soon as I start talking about it, he goes into the back of the tank and goes into hiding. But they're just bold little fish. They have so much personality for their size. They are really, really cool little fish to get if you've got a small tank and need a fish with big personality that doesn't need to be kept in groups or anything like that. The Bolivian ram is a good fish for maybe like a 20-gallon or more tank. So, for once, I feel like we finally had something to talk about with my 29 miscellaneous. We'll move on to my 55-gallon Gourami tank. And I can't really think of anything of note to mention in this tank since the last time we did a video. I haven't really done anything to it. I haven't done any water changing or anything to the plants. I did notice recently that I've got a lot of duckweed in here. So at some point when I get in here and do a water change, I'm going to need to try to skim off some of the duckweed before it gets way too out of control. And we'll have to try to stay on top of that. But you can see I've got some crud growing on the glass in here, and it's being kept reasonably under control by my off-wax grazing fish in this tank, and you can see all those little scratches and scrapes, all those little teeth marks in there, so you know they've been in there working on it. My big fat Siamese algae eaters down there, there's one, I'm not even sure where the other one is, I saw it dash by a moment ago. They're doing a good job of keeping on top of everything. The tank still looks good and nice and clean. Again, the duckweed at this point is my bigger concern than the algae. We'll also note that my temple plant that I put in there is getting really big and growing all the way up to the surface. It's not quite emergent yet. I don't want it to be. I just noticed right here, if you'll notice, there's a secondary branch growing. So what I'm probably going to do is get in here and cut it down here somewhere, and I will start rooting this piece in and allow this piece to start forking and branching and getting a little bushier in the water. So I will add this piece of temple plant to my collection of other plants that I have for sale. I do have some temple plant right now for sale, as well as my Java fern and my water sprite that I've always got for sale. So if you're interested in a little bit of temple plant that I've got available right now, check out my email down below and hit me up and we'll talk about getting that shipped out to you. So otherwise, I can't really think of anything I've got going on in my Gourami tank, so let's move on because we got plenty to talk about around the room today. Just did a big water change on my 55-gallon T-bar tank. That being my T-bar right there. So not a lot really to talk about with the water change per se, but I did put some cooler water back in the tank. I've been having issues with this tank running really warm temperature. I shot a video about it earlier where I'm not really sure why I've got such high temperatures in there. It was 29 degrees earlier, and the thermometer or the thermostat is set at 26, and yet it still keeps creeping up to 28 or 29 degrees. So not going to get into a discussion about that at the moment, but when I did the water change, I deliberately put some cooler water back in the tank, and it's been less than an hour, maybe about an hour and a half at the most, something like that. I don't know, I lose track of time. It hasn't been that long, put it that way. And now we're already back up to 28 degrees. So I think the point there is that when you do a water change, even if you put significantly cooler water into the tank, a lot of people get really concerned about shifting the water temperature in your tank too much. If you've got, say, a 55-gallon tank and you do a 10% water change, you're removing, 5 gallons or something out of it, and you put just cold tap water, think about the amount of water that's already in the tank that you're mixing it with. And I'm not really sure how to do the math there, but it winds up being that you don't adjust that temperature very much at all. If you did a massive water change, and ran significantly cooler water, that would be a different story. But just running a little bit, few degrees cooler, I did maybe a 20% water change this morning, and when I ran the water back in, I ran it in at maybe 3 or 4 degrees cooler than what was already in the tank. That probably didn't amount to changing the water temperature 1 degree overall. And then when you think about the amount of mass that's actually in this tank, the sheer volume of substrate, all of those big, massive rocks, all those dense, heavy rocks, it's a lot of mass holding a lot of energy. So if those rocks are 85 degrees Fahrenheit, and I put some water in there that's a little bit cooler than that, how long do you think it takes for those rocks to release enough energy back into that water, before you're bringing that tank temperature back up? So I used to be really, really worried about water temperature when I did water changes when I was, early on in fish keeping. And I learned pretty quickly that you don't have to be really, really specific when you do the water change, as long as you've got that temperature within a few degrees. And I would definitely recommend a few degrees cooler. If you're going to err to being not quite the same temperature, definitely err to being, 3 to 5 degrees cooler rather than 3 to 5 degrees warmer when you're doing your water change, and everybody will be happier for it. Your tank will adjust much more quickly. It's a lot easier for those rocks to shed a little bit of energy to warm that water up than it is for a warm tank to cool back down if you've slightly overheated it. So keep that in mind. Always err to the side of caution on the cooler side when you're doing water changes, but don't lose sleep over getting that temperature exact when you do it. You're not really going to risk doing all that much work or much harm. Lastly, I will point out that my Anubias are growing like mad in here. You can see the main, well, maybe we can see it. The main rhizome runs right up there. It's like a tree trunk. And then I've got all these offshoot rhizomes that are still in their own right significant rhizomes, but they're giving rise to, no pun intended, they're giving rise to a lot of growth in here that I'm probably going to need to get in there and thin out again. It wasn't too long ago that I cut the tops off of the main rhizomes just to make some room. They were actually starting to grow up and out of the water, so I might have to get in here again and likewise maybe even go so far as to go down here and really significantly reduce these chunks of rhizome. Right here you can see where I removed the other piece, and you can see how I'm getting all this new growth generating in here. I've got this whole new rhizome coming out here and all that new growth generating out there. So definitely we'll be having some of that available for sale too. We'll probably make some special arrangements for those really large chunks of Anubias like that rather than the normal little snippings I sell. But again, those will be some fairly large chunks available pretty soon. So otherwise, I don't think there's a whole lot to talk about. I'm thrilled that my little catfish is out swimming around so much. We don't really get a whole lot of a view of him. I bought that as a petricola. Lots of discussion over the years, but I have settled on the fact that it is probably, I'm almost entirely certain that it is actually a Synodontis lucipinus. It's the tiny little one. It hasn't grown since I've got it. I've had it in there for years, and it's still that tiny little thing. If it was actually the petricola, it would be about 5 inches long by now, and it's simply not. So that settles it that it's definitely the Synodontis lucipinus. So moving on, I knew this was going to be a lengthy video. I got a lot to cover today. My 40 breeder, not much to talk about since we've done our last video, with the exception, now that I'm just reminded about it, we should have mentioned this when we were looking in the T-bar tank, but a lot changes around here quickly and a lot moves on. My angelfish got really aggressive. This one here, my green giant, I know that looks sort of bluish turquoise, but that is a green giant. And it got really aggressive. You can still see its lower lip is kind of puffy and white. It looks like it's pouting or about to cry. But that's like that. Its lip is still beat up from attacking the other angelfish, my German blue, that is in the tank we were just looking in, the T-bar tank. And I don't know if it had to do with the temperature in the tank being warmer. That's my guess. A lot of people seem to agree with me that... Oh, somebody nipped my Molly's tail off there. You can see how it's only got the little hook on the bottom and not the top anymore. Just noticed that. But the warmer temperatures could have spurred the aggression, and that's probably what I'm going with. And again, until I figure out the mystery of why that tank keeps getting so warm, I'm going to keep them separated. I've also always wanted an angelfish in this tank, and now that I've got one in here, I love the way it looks. This tank is getting kind of crowded and busy, and as those rainbow fish grow, someone suggested I actually move them over into the tank the angelfish just came out of, and I had already been thinking about that, so that actually is a possibility that those rainbow fish might get moved over into my T-bar tank over here. So we'll have to wait and see how that goes. That'll be way down the road, so no point really in talking about it now. I will also say something else I've been thinking about today, which is my plants and the lush, there's no other word for it, lush plant growth I get, considering what I do to get this kind of plant growth, which is absolutely nothing. And I have people ask me all the time, including people that purchase plants from me, you know, what do you do to make your plants grow the way they grow? You know, I put them in my tank and they just kind of sit there, or they just, you know, they grow, but nothing, you know, it's not vigorous like I see in your tanks. And I don't know what to tell you. I honestly don't know what to tell you. I've been asked that question a million times over the years. I do absolutely nothing to my plants. I leave them alone. I don't put foods in my tanks. I don't put ferts in my tanks. I don't inject CO2. I don't add Excel. I don't add anything. I do nothing. And my plants look like this. I chalk it up to being a combination of high nutrient levels in the plants because of my sort of lax husbandry. I let the water changes go a little too long, and my nitrate levels are a little bit high. And when you've got high nitrates, you've also probably got elevated phosphates and, you know, all the other stuff that's associated with elevated nitrates. And plants love that, you know. They crave it, in fact. And that, coupled with the fact that we're down here in my basement, because I do not get plant growth like this in my tanks upstairs. I just really don't. They do well, but I have to come in here and trim and groom plants 5 times as often as I do my tanks upstairs. And I chalk that up to the elevated levels of CO2, because we're just down here in a closed basement room where the CO2, that it's not 100% accurate to say is heavier than air, but it gets the idea across. It's accurate enough to say CO2 is heavier than air, and or heavier than oxygen, whatever. CO2 tends to settle in lower places, and when you've got a lower place like a basement with no windows, and it's, you know, the levels of CO2 just elevate. Now, that's still not going to put my tanks anywhere approaching the amount of CO2 that would be in an injected tank. And I also don't think I'm unique in having fish tanks in my basement. So other people that have fish tanks in their basement that don't get ventilated and aired out on a regular basis should equally have lots of CO2 in the air, and therefore they also should have good, vigorous plant growth. So if that's not the case, then I don't know what else to chalk it up to. But I've always chalked it up to high CO2, high nutrients, and I'm not shy with my lights. I do a 12-hour on, 12-hour off light cycle. I know a lot of people say that's too much, and that's why I have algae issues and all that. I don't care. Having algae in a tank is part of having a fish tank to me. Doesn't bother me a bit. I like having that natural 12 and 12 cycle. I can't exactly fade in and fade out, sunset, twilight, and all that kind of stuff. So we just round it to 12 and 12, 12 on, 12 off, and everybody seems to be happy enough with that. But that also adds to plant growth. If you've got 6-hour light cycle every day, you know, you're giving your plants a lot less light than I am. So that's definitely something to consider too. So moving on to my 125-gallon native tank. Very, very quiet, chilled out, subdued tank today. I did just do a water change in here today, but the real reason it's all chilled out like this is because there's a lot of people not in there anymore. I got all of the sunfish out, and one of the really big creek chubs has now been removed. And so we're down to the tilapia, who was never really that boisterous to begin with. I've still got my big pleco in there. I've still got the Chinese algae eater in there. And then I've still got a few creek chubs. They are really still sketched out. You can see, I mean, they are just super duper hiding. There's a little eyeball peeking out from underneath the leaf there. That's kind of funny looking. Suckerfish are laying low, trying to look like a little stick on the bottom and doing a pretty good job of it. And then most everybody else is just kind of back there sitting in what, as far as they're concerned, is the current, which is a result of my big 1,500 gallon per hour power head right there. And the fish like to sit in there. And that was their natural behavior. That's what they would do in a stream. It does not really require a whole lot of effort for them to sit in the current like that. They're basically streamlined and designed to sit in the current like that. And they just wait for food to come to them. That's again, very natural behavior for them. It conserves energy, and they just wait. And if they see some food drift by, they'll move over to snatch at it or check it out, just like that. And then they get back in line and just wait for something else to drift by. So again, that's not them hiding or anything. That's very natural behavior for them. So this is hiding. He's definitely laying low. Not sure what's going on. Doesn't know whether he's going to be getting a boot here pretty soon. And of course he is, but we don't have to remind him of that. So some changes will be coming up pretty soon. Not really going to get into that now. As far as this update goes, that's all I really did today was the water change. I didn't wipe down the glass or anything. I didn't do anything with the fish. I just pulled some water out, put some fresh water back in, and then put the lid back on, and we called it good. So we're going to move on over here to my... Going to skip the snail tank. That's just a snail tank. Nothing really to talk about going on in there. My gudgeon tank, haven't done anything with it this week. I really need to. I need to get in there and do a very, very gentle gravel vac. This is one of my tanks. This is my only tank that has sand in it. It's got black sand in it, and I really don't like it. It's the same material as my Eco Complete, but this is just the Eco Complete sand, and it makes doing vacuuming very difficult. For one thing, it sort of allows the tank to stay cleaner. It's so densely packed that nothing gets in it. It just sits on top of it, which is why you can see it looks so filthy so quickly. It's black and every little speck shows up on it and does not sink into it. So if you've got enough current going around, it keeps everything sort of up and suspended, and eventually will get picked up by the filter. But in a case like this, when I've got all this thick vegetation going on and I've got a lot of duckweed happening in here, you can see this tank's kind of growing out of control. Not a lot of room for vigorous water circulation flowing around in here, and as a result, I wind up getting stuff starting to build up and settle on the bottom. So that's a really good indicator that it's time to get in there and do some serious work on the tank. I will have to very gently vacuum. I get the vacuum just close enough to suck the debris up without pulling the sand up, because believe me, a gravel vac will suck that sand right up and out of your tank. And I don't recommend the black sand unless you're somebody that likes fiddly stuff that's difficult to deal with and, whatever. But if you like the look of it, it's cool looking stuff. I'm not going to argue with that. I like the way it looks, just don't like the way it acts. But need to get in there and remove a bunch of plants. I need to get in there and thin out some of the duckweed. And then, of course, I need to do a filter change and, water change and all that kind of stuff. And apparently my gudgeon is not going to make an appearance. Well, there he is. I guess we'll force him to make an appearance. There's my gudgeon hiding in the cave. My rubber lip pleco is probably in this cave, but apparently not. Possibly my South American bumblebee catfish is in that cave, but I don't see any sign of it. Again, this tank to me is more of an aquatic garden than fish tank. It just grows plants, and it grows them really well, but doesn't do a lot for having a lot in the way of fish in there. We'll do something with this tank one day. We'll see. Moving on to my 125-gallon tank. Let me walk down here and get around my big centerpiece Waterfall, where we can get a little better look at the whole tank. We just did a fair whack of work on this one. I did not do anything with the filter, but I did do a large water change and got in there and wiped all the glass down. And honestly, that's about it. It seemed like a lot of work just because of the amount of glass there is to wipe down. But I didn't do anything with the plants. I didn't gravel vac, and as I said, I didn't do anything with the filter. So this tank is looking really good. I'm really enjoying the way this looks. I've really got to get back down to House of Tropicals and talk to Mike about some rainbow fish. He said he was going to keep his eye out for some larger ones for me because of the tenopoma in this tank, who is hiding at the moment. I'm sure he'll turn up at some point. The tenopoma in this tank would eat any smaller rainbow fish. Typically when you buy rainbow fish, or even if I got more Congo tetras or something, the tenopoma would just make a snack out of them. So I need to get some sort of grown rainbow fish, or else I need to get a grow out tank and keep them for 6 months or 9 months in a bigger tank and then move them over to this one, which I don't want to do. So hopefully Mike will be able to find me some larger full-grown rainbow fish. But that color with that bright orange mixed with all of the earth tone rocks that I selected to go in here, and then of course the rich dark woodwork, and then I've got my chocolatey tenopoma and my dark synodontis. So having that nice orange coloration on some kind of rainbow fish, and then of course my rainbow shark there with all that orange and sort of greenish gray color. This tank's really coming together nicely, even though it's kind of been established for years, and I'm really looking forward to getting the rainbow fish in here in larger quantity. So my tiger lotus is doing really well. That's growing to the point where I've actually got multiple. I don't know if we can see the one back there. You can kind of make it out, but there's one on the surface back there. Probably make it out better from inside looking up. So we got pads on the surface. We've got this big Anubias back here. Is already making its way up to the surface. I might have to get in there and trim some of that Anubias up again. I've got little baby Java. You can see it growing right off the tip there. I got that kind of stuff everywhere. I've got all of this little baby Java fern. I don't know what kind of Java this is, but it is some type of Java fern. And I've got a few of these in the other room. And you can see all these little stems and shoots coming up. Those are all little babies that are growing. Those, again, will go into my grow out and will be available for sale. Again, if you're interested, check my email down below. And somewhere in here, probably hiding down in the dense vegetation in this corner, is going to be my Tenopoma. It's amazing to me that a fish that size can just hide in a tank like this to the point where I can't even see him. There he is. There's my Tenopoma. Can't take a look at this tank without at least saying hello and having a little bit of a look at my Tenopoma, although he's not being very cooperative today. It's interesting how bashful this fish is after all the years I've had him. Doesn't seem to mind when I do a water change. If I've got my hand in the tank, I have to sort of gently nudge him out of the way. I have to sort of literally push him a little bit to get him to swim away from my hand while I'm wiping the glass down. But when I put a camera in front of the tank and start talking, maybe it's my booming voice, you know, as I'm basically shouting at the tank. But he definitely seems to be a lot less comfortable when I'm shooting video. But really, really awesome fish nonetheless. One of my favorites, no doubt. So, moving on. My angelfish tank. Did a water change. I changed the light bulb out in this. I thought it had burned out, but it turned out it didn't. So I changed it to a 2700K, and then I wound up changing it back. And now we are back at the 5000K, which I like better. But we did a water change and a filter change. The filter had actually jammed up and stopped working on me. And I didn't even think about it. When I started the filter back up, it had dried out. And so that actually wiped out all the biologicals in there. And when I started the filter up and running again, I had a few days of cloudy water. Now, the tank itself has enough surface area that I wasn't worried about crashing the cycle and having my fish die or anything. But it was noticeable that the tank sort of clouded up for a few days. And in my experience, I find that whenever I've got cloudy water, I can check my nitrites. Not my nitrates, but my nitrites. And cloudy water is almost always, not always, but almost always associated with high nitrites. And by high, I mean any. It should read 0. If it doesn't read 0, something's not quite right with your nitrogen cycle. You should have no ammonia and you should have no discernible nitrites. So when I check a tank and I've got cloudy water and I see 1 part per million or 2 parts per million or something like that, then it's okay, you know, something's going on, don't know what. Might have been a little ammonia spike, and the ammonia spike caused a little bit of a nitrite spike. But that cloudy water, for some reason, always seems to be associated with the little bit of a nitrite spike. And I did get that after I started that filter back up. So that could have been just because of all the dead material in the filter. You know, all that dead biologicals, that is, you know, organic material that has now died and is decomposing. And when I ran that filter and just ran fresh water back through it, I basically started flushing all of that dead material back into the tank. And I could have caused a little ammonia spike by doing that. And that little ammonia spike in turn caused a little nitrite spike, which in turn gave me a little bit of cloudy water for a few days. And now we're back to being pretty much cleared up. So the other issue I've got with this tank is my male cherry barb right there. Beautiful fish. Has 2 females to chase around the tank, and yet he still harasses every single fish in this tank. And it just seems to be almost relentless. So the cherry barb has got to go. I'm not exactly sure where I want to put it. Any other tank I put it in is probably going to harass the fish in it or be eaten by the fish in it. And I don't want either of those outcomes. But I'm really getting sick of watching him chase everybody around the tank. And these brand new diamond tetras I got are being harassed constantly. And I just want to get that barb out of here. So what I'm thinking about doing is taking my 2 resident guppies that live in my quarantine tank. This tank just stays up and running right now. It houses more snails than anything. But it is a quarantine tank that I always have available, and I always have these 2 little guppies living in here just because. So I'm thinking maybe scoop those guppies out, throw them in some other tank somewhere. It's not like I can't find room to squeeze them in. and then I can throw that little cherry barb in here, and he can have Darth Vader stare at him all day long, and he can get what he deserves. So that's my thoughts on the cherry barb, and that is also what's going on in my quarantine tank. Nothing. So my last tank that we're going to look at in this video, because we're already at half an hour, is I'm still calling it my brackish tank, even though we're kind of experimenting at the moment, and we are just below the threshold of being brackish water at this point. It is slightly under the specific gravity parameters for brackish water, which starts, depending on where you look. Some people say it starts at 1.004. Other people say that the low end of brackish is 1.005. I have always subscribed to 1.005 mentality, but right now we are way below that. We are down to 1.0. Well, honestly, I don't know. I did a water change the other day, and then I just poured some salty water in when I was done. So I don't really know what the actual specific gravity is. I did a little taste test. I dipped my finger in there, and it's above the taste threshold. I can taste the salt, but not very much. So we're still below the brackish threshold. I'm confident of that. But the last time I did an actual specific gravity test with my refractometer, the specific gravity was 1.002. So that is well below anybody's definition of brackish water. I seem to notice my mollies are a lot more calm now that the water is less heavy, less dense, I guess technically would be the word. The specific gravity of the water is lower. It's less salty. And my plants are doing better. I'm getting much less in the way of all that red growth. And the lesions that were on Butterbean are still, if not healing and going away, they're certainly not getting any worse. And he looks a lot better than he did before. So maybe just years and years of keeping him at that consistent specific gravity that never changed was what the issue was. I don't really know why that would be the issue for him, but that's entirely possible that that was what the issue was, and reducing the specific gravity is helping to heal him. Not really sure the impact it's going to have on my gobies. The gobies really should be in brackish water as well, but I got another one around here somewhere. There it is. But I think at the 1.002 specific gravity or thereabouts, even if I go up to 1.004, I think we will still have enough dissolved solids and enough mineral salts in the water that those gobies will do fine. So I think that's where we're going to go from now on in this tank. Is we're still going to call it my brackish tank just because that's what the name of this tank is rather than the description of it. But we're probably going to stay just below that brackish threshold, at least for a while. Maybe we'll go back up later or something like that. But for now, we're going to stay just under that brackish threshold, despite this still being called my brackish tank. So we are going to skip update on my waterfall. That's probably another 20-minute video all in its own right. So we'll save that for a standalone. Maybe tomorrow, within the next few days, we'll get that video out there. But we're going to wrap this one up and say thanks for watching. Make sure you're subscribed. You don't want to miss anything else I got coming up. Never know what it's going to be with me. And then don't forget, of course, this one is my 29-gallon miscellaneous tank where we started. So thanks again. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see you real soon on the next one.